Anawana, your work is said to be very much challenging hierarchies and systems of knowledge, and the work in Aberystwyth in particular was challenging Western ideas of opera with what you call an experimental opera. Please, can you tell me how that work evolved?
The work itself comes in different layers because first you have actually the dialogue behind the dialogue which you hear in the libretto. But it's insinuated too, because you have women which are talking, whether one is a man or a woman. So there's this idea of a fluid gendered positionality of the vessels or the characters in the opera, which are represented by the objects you see on the stage. So each object is an extension of a character in the opera. And so these characters are non-gendered. And then, so that's another layer of each of the object. And also the objects are also, I mean, when you talk about horns and history through different cultures, whether it's in the West or in Africa or in Asia, you still have horns which have been used to announce information, you know, almost like a loudspeaker in the way it would function today. So there's this idea of the messenger, you know. So that again is another layer of the work. But then you have the conversation about different hierarchies within communities, whether it's power, which is defined by resources, and that is defined through a historical narrative in which each human being associates themselves with, because as human beings, of course, we all come from different places, and those places have got different histories, and those histories become the makeup of what makes us as, you know, actors within a whole citizenry of the world. So there are all these layers, which is also difficult to talk about, you know, to talk about it from an isolation of object, or actually what is it, an opera? An opera in the fact that life in itself is an operatic happening, because it has love, it has tragedy, it has different things happening at each point of one's life. So if opera, or if Western opera is defined as a celebration of tragedy and love and everything, that's the same with other operas from somewhere else. They also talk about the same things. But why I'm calling my opera an experimental opera is also because I'm borrowing this word which has been used in the Western world. And when the Western idea of looking at opera has looked at other operas, they have always added the word folk. So when they look at Wudima or Giavilo, where I take the singing styles from, you know, the kind of structures of the way one uses voice or the instrument I use, then you are talking about folk opera. So then I'm thinking, like, why should it be used as folk opera? Why should it be called as folk opera? So then how do we speak about these two different forms of ways of expressing, you know, love and tragedy and culture? How do we speak about it from a more kind of non-hierarchical or a linear shifting narratives where value is not determined of where one is positioned or where a certain knowledge system is coming from geographically? So I think for me this is where the opera also becomes the experimental opera, because then it's pushing the narrative, but it's also creating, because the objects also are created from everyday life. In the same way Duchamp is taking the, you know, the toilet or the cup and putting it in an art exhibition space, I think it's the same way I'm taking a basket and using it differently. So I think there's also behind this, there's also the idea of like wanting to create different iconographies within working with art, within working with found objects, but found objects which have got a history in itself or an association to a culture which is probably non-Western, and how do you play around with that within, you know, where I am now. So all these kind of layers, I don't know whether I'm articulating them in a good way, but I think what I'm trying to say that within that opera, there's a converging of different positions, of different position in relation to knowledge, in relation to history, in relation to kind of connection and dialogue as well. So when you experience the opera, there's also a part of it, from another layer, which is confrontative, which puts you in the position. I don't know if you felt that when you were listening to it, because the you in it becomes the extended audience. So in a way, there's this kind of thin line between the vessels that are, or the characters in the opera, and the person viewing the opera, whether the person is also being questioned by the character in the opera, or maybe, you know, and like, how do you extend that discussion as well? So, yeah.
I like.
One question.
No. I think it's a good explanation. The way it's set out on a platform that you, as a listening member of the audience, can just walk around. You know, there are chairs placed all around, so there's no sense of stage in one part of the room and, you know, audience in the other. So I quite like the idea that you could choose where to situate yourself in the spatial experience.
Yeah. I think that the circle part comes also from, again, you know, it's informed by other knowledges of where the circle means infinity, you know, the kind of life that goes on and on. But also I was thinking about the circle also as, for instance, in other knowledge systems, like the Chokwe people, which are found in both in Congo and Zambia, they have the cosmos, which the circle, the center of the circle becomes the God center, you know. But because that kind of structure has also been kind of used within also architecture, you know. When you look at traditional architecture, sometimes in different cultures, you'd see that the huts are built in a circular, and there's always this space, the courtyard, which is round, which is the center of the life, you know. In the community would have maybe the kitchen, people are cooking from the middle of that center. Every activity, you know, whether it's a party, whether it's people gathering to talk, whether it's story time, happens in the middle of this centering, which is the secular thing, which I think for me that's also part of the work. And of course, the fact that all the huts coming from outside can reach into this circle. They've got access to the stage, you know, which again kind of offsets the idea of the opera being on a stage and people sitting in a hall, you know. So kind of to break this and to say that there's a different way in which you can share, and in which you can revisit some of these knowledge systems and actually reflect on what is value, what makes one knowledge more than the other. So I don't know if that comes out directly, but as you say that you can move around, so that was the idea to allow this.
There's also, I confess, a sense of delight when the singing happens, because the first 10, 15, 20 minutes is either percussive sounds or the speaking of the characters, and then there is singing, which is a joy to listen to. That's a coming together of these spirits that the characters are articulating.
I can say that when I was making the opera, when I started reading on opera, I came across an article which was written by Wole Soyinka, the Nigerian laureate, Nobel Peace Laureate, literature. laureate, and he talks about how he was, won to opera when he was growing up, and it would happen in the marketplace, and when I started understanding what he was writing, and then I started understanding also that I have been exposed to this similar kind of narratives, and it's interesting where somebody sings. I mean, my father sings something in the opera, but it's also quite a very sorrowful song.
Your father is a character, actually recorded, his recorded voice.
The male voice you hear is my dad, who practices geographies, which is the one of the Tonga operatic form of folk opera, if we could. So, and I asked him to translate a stanza in the libretto. So the first one, that's what he actually translates. But then he decides he didn't want to just sing it directly. He wanted to understand the idea why I was doing that. So he interprets the whole libretto, and he sings it. And in there, he talks about a shared knowledge, but he also talks about history. And of course, when you hear it, it just sounds like, oh, this is very sad, very beautiful. But at the same time, when you understand the language, you hear also the sad moments of it. Because the operas we have also, they are also made to also perform when there's a funeral, or when the people are trying to rethink or remember memorials. But because they talk about history, they automatically become forms of knowledge dissemination, like passing the history, because they would sing about things that happened 1,000 years ago, which they have heard again through song, through their ancestors. They'll sing about them, but they also sing about what is happening at the moment. So it kind of, the operatic forms in southern Zambia, which I'm using, they're actually another way of archiving knowledge. So, but this archive is an archive which regenerates, it's not stagnant, and then it automatically also makes human beings perform as archives themselves, and then that is passed on to the other generation, the next generation. And that it doesn't really work that you have somebody in a class showing you this is how you sing, and it's almost again using another form of knowledge sharing, which is the body, where a young person who hangs around a grandmother that is singing is actually learning, and then takes over the baton, and the next person and the next person. And that, I think, for me, that's interesting. Like, how do we look at archives? Because and these cultures are quite a good example of how archives are used within a culture. So,
yeah, a living archive.
Yes, a living archive.
It's evolving.
So,
with each set of performers, with each performance, there'll be different performers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
And this work around us, can you tell us a little bit about this?
So this work is called I Shall Cure You With My Tongue. So the work was produced in 2018 as part of 3 listening stations. And these listening stations started because when I started doing my PhD research, I was very interested with some of the ideas by Frantz Fanon. So I decided I wanted to learn more from other people. So I started traveling and talking to different people, and spent also some time in Dar es Salaam, where I also met some of the people that were working in the 60s in the University of Dar es Salaam, because in the University of Dar es Salaam in the 60s, late 60s, 70s, there was a group of scholars that came from different fields within the university, from history, from political science, from theater, and different other fields, and they would meet to have what were called the DA debates. And this community was started by Walter Rodney and Wamdere, who was a Ugandan historian. So they started this program where they would talk, and they were funded also by the government, by Julius Nyereri's government. And what this place was, it was a vibrant place which they would talk about. There were Marxist, socialists, like different thoughts that would come together, and they would argue, and then they would produce papers which were printed by printers called the Tandon Brothers. They were also from Dar es Salaam. So when I went there, I was really interested because I had heard about this, so I wanted to dig more, because Fanon was active in the 60s. And some of the people from this group knew him. And so I went to Dar es Salaam to have, to get a bit insight and to know actually who was Fanon and how his ideas influenced the liberation for becoming, nation states from colonization, or the decolonization period from settler colonialism. So it was very interesting, but it was so overwhelming material. So I wanted to share some of the material. So I made these listening stations where I made some of the text were from the conversation I had, reenacted by actors, and some were just reflections I had, and others were more like intuitive insights of scribbled poetry. So I Shall Cure You With My Tongue came from that. So it was just two stations in a room with these terracotta clay pots, and you could hear this soft whisper of curing, and then the cassava powder, which is the manioc inside. So the viewer is supposed to kind of put their face in the bowl for them to hear, but also to kind of have a conversation in their mind, for instance, or kind of continuous. So this is how this work comes in. And for this exhibition, we decided to remake it in, and also added three more texts to the original one. And this is why you have four different stations, which are talking, also reflecting about what is going on in the world now, but also voices which, like positions which maybe we all know about them, but it will be different also to confront them from an intimate position of listening and trying to listen to that voice.
So it's very much, the stories are very much about listening, paying attention to each other.
Yeah, it is about deep listening, because I think with everything that's going on in the world, most of the time we talk about things, but we actually really don't listen.